Welcome back to Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about Gilles De Rais. He was a French knight in the 15th century, and he was accused and convicted of killing hundreds of children. But before that happens, he was just an eccentric, I guess the equivalent of like a multi-millionaire French nobility who was just spending away his money. So
clearly humanity hasn't changed all that much since then.
So he had a lot of eccentric habits. He built the Chapel of Holy Innocents, where he officiated mass himself in robes he designed. This is following his time as when he was a knight. He put on Le Mystère du Siege d'Orléans, a play about the Siege of Orleans that called for about 140 speaking parts and 500 extras. By the time the play was ready to be put on, Gilles was broke. Now that is the Cliff Notes version. Cecilia, please, let's color this picture. What the hell was this play? Why did he spend literally everything he had on
this? I guess he didn't need anybody to greenlight it.
He was the wealthiest man in France at this time.
He was like, I'm gonna put on a play for everybody. And meanwhile, all of the audience members were allowed to eat and drink as much as they wanted, all on his dime during the performance. He commissioned over 200 costumes for the actors, which were then, after the performance, thrown away and remade for the next performance. It's just, clearly he was starting to get a little unhinged.
Right, but so this is something that we sort of touched on in part one, which was that this battle made such an impact on him because it was so huge, and then he retired from fighting, and then it's sort of, what do I do now? And then he just poured all of his resources into this play and putting it on, and 140 speaking parts. Just to think about your favorite movie or TV show and think about how many people talk. It's gonna be way less than 140.
Yeah.
Even like a barista in a show. It's just, this reminded me a little bit of
well, there's the 500 extras, we can't forget those either.
It was a very realistic depiction of the Siege of Orleans. So he has this insane play that he's putting on, but then around 1430, and we're gonna go down this path and then we're gonna veer off in part three, is when historians say if there was child murdering started taking place. So the first murder might have taken place in 1430, but then he must have like paced it out a little bit, and he was just steadily killing for a while.
I think how it all started was after this play and during the play, he was steadily going broke, and everybody around him, including his grandfather, was like, whoa, slow the fuck down. Can I say that?
Yeah, you super can. This is the show.
Slow down is what he said. And people were starting to get really worried that he was just getting rid of his entire fortune. So family members, friends appealed to the Pope, the King?
Yeah, they said that you gotta shut down his spendthrift ways. He is spending all of the fortune. And you would like to think that maybe they were doing it because they really cared about Gilles De Rais. The truth is that they were looking out for their own benefit.
Absolutely.
They were looking out for their own interest, which was if he spent all of his fortune, then there might be nothing should something happen to him.
So they banned anybody in France from going into contract with Gilles De Rais, except for, was it Brittany?
Duke of Brittany.
Brittany.
Yeah, he was he was his.
He was like, let him do what he wants.
He was his protector of sorts. The Duke of Brittany was, and everyone else was not allowed to do business with him. And I cannot stress enough how broke Gilles was when this was all going down.
So if you just picture this, young guy who's he's famous, he's rich, now he's lost everything. So what does he do?
He turns to
summon a demon.
I was gonna say, he turns to Satan, as any rational person would. You turn to Satan, you try to summon a demon because you need to make a deal with the devil to get your riches back. It's not, come on, it's not that weird.
And alchemy, by the way, was illegal at the time.
Yeah.
So he's already breaking all sorts of laws. But he found a priest? Who was this guy who?
He found, I won't say a priest, but he found someone he found a religious figure that was. Yeah, what's the name?
Prelati.
Yeah, he found a religious figure that was willing to help him conjure the demon that he needed to get money. But in order to do that, there were evil things that had to be done.
Yeah, so he literally signed a contract with the demon, and they try to summon him. And after 3 tries, the demon did not appear. So Gilles De Rais got kind of pissed, and he was like, yo, dude,
where the fuck is my demon?
Where's my demon, whose name was Baron, by the way. And
it's just, I'm cracking up because,
absurd.
I mean, you have this fearsome, you have this guy who is just, his back is against the wall.
Yeah.
He's like, I've lost everything. I am disgraced. I'm embarrassed. People won't do business with me. I am publicly humiliated.
Grandfather.
And I need to summon a demon. I need to summon a war demon that is gonna come up and is gonna help me get out of this pickle. And that demon's name, that fearsome name is Baron.
Baron.
The demon's name is Baron.
Pretty fierce.
I think it's scary in a French accent, like it's Baron.
Baron. So the demon still did not appear, and so the religious guy, Prelati, said, okay, well, Baron is kind of pissed at you still, so what you need is a human sacrifice.
Right.
Which is how it all began, allegedly.
Allegedly, which is how it all began, and then he's like, all right, I'll bring you this human sacrifice in exchange for like the gold coins. I believe it was gold coins that were gonna come from the sacrifice. And this brings us to May 15th, 1440. De Rais reportedly kidnaps a clergyman, and this is the story that I have read. And something that's sort of fun about talking about these older cases is that so much of it is lore, because I've heard a number of different accounts about what exactly happened. What we do know is that he did kidnap a clergyman, but why? This is the story that I have found the most corroboration with. So Gilles was selling off all of his properties, and he sold off one of these properties to a gentleman, and then this guy hadn't moved into the property yet. And we're talking about a castle. Like it wasn't just an apartment. It was a huge castle. And Gilles was like, well, this guy hasn't moved in, so I want to go hang out at this castle that was mine. Like I know I sold it to him, but that was my spot. I want to go there. And so he went there, and then he found out that the keys had been changed. And he was like, God damn it, like I want to get into my castle. And so I guess he heard from a peasant or something that that this clergyman had, this cleric had the key to the spot, and he was like, I'm gonna beat the shit out of that. I'm gonna beat up this cleric and make him let me back into the castle. Well, bad move, because back in the 1400s, the people that had the most power were those that were somehow nobility, that we're talking about the monarchy, people that were born into money or married up with money, or people in the church. So this was not a good move on Gilles De Rais, and ultimately it would lead to his downfall, because then he was investigated for what this crime had been, which was initially just, well, it's not good. I mean, he beat up a clergyman who probably was very shocked. But what was found when he was put on trial is that all these crimes against children came to the forefront. So perhaps if he had just not gone to his castle that day, I mean, I don't know, he probably, because that's what we're gonna get
away
into.
With it too.
This might have been, this whole thing could be a whole political conspiracy that we're all just regurgitating because it's been hundreds of years, and if you tell a lie enough, it becomes true. Now, this is what happens when he is put on trial, is that all these crimes against children come up. Now, what were some of the details from the trial that you found, that when he's put on trial, they say you are guilty of child murder?
So it gets a little murky here, because he confessed under threat of excommunication and torture.
Along with his 2 helpers or accomplices.
Cousins or something?
Yeah, their names were Poitou and Henriette, and they were his manservants, as you had at that time.
But so what happens is that things get really gruesomely detailed.
Really quick.
Really quick. So it's not, we're saying like, oh, he killed 140 children. No, it's torture, necrophilia, sodomy, like shit gets dark.
And so the case for Gilles' guilt is in that there is so much detail in this confession.
And they said that it was some of the details were so gruesome that they struck them from the record and recorded them only in Latin, because it was too gruesome for anybody to even see or hear.
Right. And I actually have an excerpt from part of his confession, which is narrated by Amir doing his very best 1400s French accent. Let's take a look.
It is very true, my lords, that I have ravished children from their mothers. These children, I have killed them or had them killed, either by slitting their throats with dagger or knife, or by separating their head from body with axe, or by breaking the skull with stick or hammer, or by splitting their chest, or by opening their belly. Sometimes by attaching them with a cord to an iron hook, other times by burning them. These diabolical ideas came for me 8 years ago. The count would be too long, and I recall less their names than their heads before and after death. In truth, the demon tormented me often, and I confess to having invoked him many times. But before doing it, I heard Mass and confessed myself so that the devil could not bite into my soul.
Okay, here's the thing. If it is true what Gilles did, then the devil certainly bit into his soul. It's just such a strange thing. Like, I confessed, okay? I went to communion, so I think we're good here.
It wasn't me, it was Baron.
Yeah, it was Baron, it was the demon. So in that he confesses to over 140 murders. In part what he says, and I know that you have a quote from this confession as well, he says that the bodies were incinerated with the help of his accomplices following this gruesome, brutal torture that he said that he did to these children. Parents came forward saying that their kids had gone into one but of the many of De Rais castles and said that they were never seen again, that their kids had disappeared. Now, bodies were not turned up, and that's something that we're gonna get into in part 3 for the case of his innocence, but children did disappear. Now, over to you, Cecilia, on what was some of the testimony or some of the confession that stuck out to you?
Real quick before I read this wonderful quote, one detail that really stuck out to me, which, disturbing, is that after he performed these acts of torture on these little boys and girls, he would often faint out of pleasure.
Well, that was according to his accomplice, right? Did he say that?
Somebody said it.
It's on the record. It's on the
Allegedly, he would faint from the pleasure, and then which left Henriette and whatever to go and dispose of the bodies while he slept off his.
Which they say they incinerated.
Burned slowly.
They burned,
Well, same thing. Okay, so my quote. When the said children were dead, he kissed them and those who had the most handsome limbs and heads, he held up to admire them and had their bodies cruelly cut open and took delight at the sight of their inner organs. And very often when the children were dying, he sat on their stomachs and took pleasure in seeing them die and laughed.
It's brutal.
And they also talk a lot about him after slitting their throats, masturbating on their belly and thighs and having sex with their mangled corpses.
And again, the detail with which these confessions and his accomplices came forward is a case for his guilt, for sure. Because it's the sort of thing that if you're being, it's hard to imagine because we fortunately do not practice medieval torture methods today.
Yeah.
But it's hard to imagine being faced with that, what your brain might come up with. But I would postulate that it probably wouldn't be this insane amount of detail.
Yeah, right? I feel like at the time, especially if they really wanted to get rid of him, they could have accused him of one murder. Weren't people tried for things like adultery at the time? It could have been anything. They could have tried him just for summoning the demon, and he was tried and convicted of heresy too. I mean, they didn't have to, why would they make up all these nasty
especially because you already got him for beating up someone from the church, which is already bad.
Got him.
Then you get him for heresy. The way that the penal system was in this time was basically it was at their discretion how they could punish him. So they could have locked him up in a tower forever and said that we're seizing your land, you forfeit all your property, had they wanted to. So it is questionable why putting all these murders and these children's disappearances, which undoubtedly were happening given how many parents came forward, on a man if they knew he was totally innocent of it. It's a pretty big conspiracy, but we're gonna get into it in part 3. Now, he was arrested with his 2 manservants on September 15th, 1440, and all 3 were killed October 26th, 1440. Now, what's interesting to note about this is that they were hung and then they were burned at the stake, but given that Gilles De Rais was still nobility of a higher status, his body was cut down after he was hung because they didn't want to burn him. That was still seen as disrespectful, even though he was being put to death for killing so many children. I just think that that's interesting that it wasn't an equal playing field for criminals. really. I mean, even though they were all convicted of this crime, one of them they were still saying is of a higher status. He can be hanged, but he's going to be buried properly.
And I do think it's interesting with murders that we've talked about, like with Elizabeth Bathory at this time, where it's always their maids or their manservants that are convicted with them.
Yeah.
And I was looking at early serial killers, and there's some guy from Germany who ate his son and things, and allegedly had an incestuous relationship with his daughter, and his daughter was put to death with him and tortured.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Like the judicial system at the time, you could do an entire episode. Maybe we should on how the punishments did not fit the crime, and it was just sort of at the discretion of whoever was in authority and power at that time to just be like, nope, you're done.
Yeah.
We
so
just decided
his request to be buried somewhere in a church, in a chapel of his choice was granted.
Yeah, but it would be ludicrous for his accomplices to have even requested anything.
Yeah, no, they were just
absolutely
burned.
outlandish. Now, we have outlined the case for Gilles De Rais' guilt, what he was accused of, what he was convicted of, what he was put to death for. But in part 3, we're gonna break down why there is a growing population of historians and scholars who say none of this is true. This is a man who was innocent and was a part of a political conspiracy. Why do they say that? Well, we'll see you in part 3.